Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Was Born in Bandages? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Izuku Midoriya was your average kid, and just like 80% of the population at the time, he has a quirk. A mostly genetic superpower that usually manifests around the age of 4. The only exception are mutation quirks, which are present at birth. Just like Izuku's. Meet Izuku Midoriya. The boy born in bandages. Izuku Midoriya. Quirk. Mummy. The bandages wrapped around the quirk owner obscure everything but the eyes, mouth and hair, and are strong enough to pull an 18-wheeler. The bandages can be used as extra, tentacle-like appendages, allowing the user a much more significant reach and dexterity. The bandages can only be removed by the user, and underneath, the user is emancipated and dried out, only leaving the organs and eyes looking typically human. Secondary powers. The user's eyes allow them to slightly brainwash people to draw them in. They can also drain the moisture from others slowly when touching something or someone without their bandages. Once the bandages are completely unraveled, they must be completely revealed in order to allow the user to once again control them. The user needs slightly more water than the average person. Random facts. The user often makes a chattering sound, more frequently when nervous. Izuku, you're going to be late. It's your first day. Katsuki won't be happy if you miss it. Inko called from downstairs, prompting Izuku to speed up in his preparations. He adjusted his bandages one last time, grabbed his notebook, hero analysis for the future one, and ran downstairs with his backpack. All right, Mom, I'm ready. Inko gave her son a quick once-over, tears threatening to spill at the prospect of her son starting elementary school. All right, are your bandages wrapped properly? Yes, Mom. You have your notebook? Yes, Mom. And you have Dash? I have everything, Mom. Let's go. I want to meet the kids at school. She smiled softly and went to grab her keys. You, with the green hair, state your name and quirk. Yes, sir. My name is Midoriya Izuku, and my quirk is Mummy. It allows me to control the bandages wrapped around my body and gives me a mummy-like appearance. He'd said it a million times over. Today was the first day of junior high, and he was hopeful that he'd meet some interesting people. All right, you with the spiky blonde hair. Name and quirk, please. Oh dear. My name is Bakugo Katsuki, and my quirk is explosion. My sweat is nitroglycerin which I can detonate at will. He smirked deviously, something that only amplified Izuku's former feelings of oh no. And by the way, Izuku and I are gonna be the best, so don't even if you try, you extras. Izuku sighed. And there it is. Katsuki, unlike you, I don't think I'm genetically predestined to be the king of this world with but one single equal. He chittered slightly before continuing. So please, step down from your throne and remove your crown, Lord Bakugo. Because unlike you, I actually want to make friends this year. Silence. And then, fine. I shall only do this for you, my dearest companion. The sarcasm wasn't lost in translation, but there was something genuine underneath. I'm your dearest. Who'd have thought that a king like you would care for an old mummy like me? Katsuki smirked at him, eyes shining. First of all, we've been friends, quite literally since we were FING 2 years old. Of course you're my dearest, Ehol. Second of all, thank you for acknowledging my status as king, though I much prefer warlord. Third of all, you're barely a month older than me. Just because you look even 100 years old without your bandages doesn't mean dash. Excuse me, you two, I'd like to continue my class. Oh dear. Hey, can we sit here? A boy with dark purple hair and dark bags under his eyes walked up to Izuku and Katsuki, followed closely by a smiling kid with spiky, red hair, and wickedly sharp teeth. Katsuki mumbled his approval around a mouthful of chili with at least 10 spicy packets in it. While they were settling in, a third boy with heterochromia and dual-colored hair sat down on Izuku's other side without a word. Alright, let's talk favorite heroes. Mine is Crimson Riot. Sharkbait made a desperate attempt at conversation, and it worked. Bakugo appeared to think for a moment before he shrugged. Basic beach, cop-out answer, I know. But All Might is pretty great. Purple hair gave him a sideways smile. Eraserhead. Considering he's my dad, I'll give him that much credit. Izuku's head Dabi is around so fast, had he been a real mummy his head would have snapped off. Your dad is Eraserhead? The purple-haired kid nods. Aizawa Hitoshi's my name, and not getting enough sleep is my game. Katsuki scoffs. We can tell. Those bags are so dark they may as well be for a sex shop. Izuku spits out his milk at this comment. Bakugo Katsuki. I'm Midoriya Izuku. Kirishima Idro, nice to meet you guys. The group looked expectantly at Red and White before he sighed and spoke so faintly they had to lean in to hear him. That I'm Todoroki Shoto. Holy shit. Your dad is the number 2 hero? Izuku asked. More like the bane of my existence. My father forced my mother into a quirk marriage in order to have a child that could finally take All Might's place as number 1. And thus, yours truly. My a-hole of a SPRM donor hurt my mother so much she's in a mental hospital. He paused to eat an octopus dumpling, the effective equivalent of a commercial break in the middle of a horror movie. Basically, he's an abusive a-hole, and I'm the result of a quirk marriage. Katsuki had finished his chili and looked about ready to commit murder. Hitoshi's expression hadn't changed, but his eyes darkened. Kirishima's ever-present smile had faded, in its place were worried eyebrows and an uncertain frown. That. Bakugo's palms sparked and smoked, unbridled rage present in every part of his posture and appearance. He stood upright and slammed his hands on the table, causing enough of a ruckus to capture the attention of a nearby table as well. Bring him to me and I'll put him in the ground prematurely. Make that a we, Bakugo. Hitoshi had finally spoken up. I know what it's like to have an a-hole for a father. Mine wasn't around at all. Now, I have Aizawa and Yamada, but trust me when I say this, we'll beat the number 2 hero into the ground if you ask. Izuku looked askance for a moment before he grinned. His dried mouth and wrinkles around his eyes made it look almost creepy. I'll drag him to whatever tomb I came out of if need be. Bakugo cackled, and Kirishima and Hitoshi had wide grins. Even Shudo cracked a small smile. Izuku, no offense, but nothing like you could ever come out of a tomb. You're too nice. Izuku gaped in mock offense. How dare you? I'm terrifying without my bandages on, if I do say so myself. You're far from scary yourself. Katsuki's eyebrow quirked upwards. You know, I'll admit to the bandages thing. When you're wrinklier than an 80-year-old elephant, I'd say that's pretty scary. Izuku poised himself to prepare a withering retort, but Bakugo was saved by the lunch bell. Hey Mom, I'm home. Izuku walked through the door and began the tedious process of removing his bandages on the way up to his room. Hi sweetheart. How was school? Did you make any new friends? Inko was greeted by the sight of her son running downstairs. She felt a familiar, almost instinctual grin gracing her face at the sight of her sunshine child. Ironic, considering the dark and, quite frankly, semi-creepy aspect of his. Quirk. Yeah. I met Eraserhead's son, and even Endeavor's son. Oh, that reminds me. His expression turned serious, if only for a moment. I need to burn everything I own that has Endeavor's name on it. After that, he smiled wide once more. You know, for the sake of irony, and revenge for my new friend. Inko startled a bit, but she pulled through and shook her head. Sorry honey, I think that counts as arson. Normally, I'd be all for it, he'd have to have done something bad for you to be that angry with him. But you can't have anything like that on your record if you want to become a hero. Izuku shrugged. Can you find another way to dispose of it? Maybe so. What's for dinner? He dodged the question. Not a good sign. Miso soup. I got a pretty good deal on some miso podashta. Suddenly, Izuku's phone went off on the counter. Bakugo, I'm coming over for dinner and I'm dragging half and half with me. Izuku, why? Izuku, like I'm not saying you're not welcome, like get in my house, but like double each? Bakugo, his dad kicked him out for the night because he refused to use the fire half of his quirk. Izuku, I'm planning manslaughter and I need you to talk me out of it. Bakugo, Beach who TF you talking to? Wait for us to get there so we can plan with you. Izuku, Bakugo, eyes. Izuku, you'd better put those away right the F now. Izuku snapped back to reality by the smell of chicken. I thought we were having miso soup? Inko shook her head. We are, but we had some extra chicken, so I thought I might as well make it. Probably for the best. Shudo just got kicked out of his house for the night. Izuku, make up the spare bed and gather up any and all Endeavor-related items. And there it was. The dead man walking smile. Inko loved her son. Hey Kaken. Shudo. Come in, we have soup, chicken and a bunch of Endeavor-related items to burn or use Kaken's quirk to launch into the atmosphere. Izuku sidestepped the door and motioned for them to enter. Todoroki's eyebrow quirked upwards before he saw what was sitting in the living room. A full table spread of soup, rice, and various different vegetables, along with an arrangement of grilled chicken and soy sauce. On the coffee table was a variety of Endeavor posters, figures, and various other knickknacks, along with a what could only be described as a budget flamethrower, a simple match and straw attached to an aerosol can via duct tape. You all do know my quirk is half fire, right? Izuku grinned. Yes, but despite that fact, you probably want absolutely nothing to do with anything even remotely related to the flaming garbage pile. He chittered before he grabbed Shudo and Bakugo, who was at the time choking on laughter over the flaming garbage comment, and led them to the table. Dig in. We made extra food so everyone could have seconds. Shudo gave his thanks and began eating. Meanwhile, Katsuki barked a quick thanks before grabbing a piece of chicken and going rabid wolf. Izuku shook his head and began on his soup. Hey Izuku. Izuku turned to Shudo to signal that he'd gotten his attention. What do you look like under your bandages? Izuku grimaced. Not good. I basically look like a manila paper ball under here. I look mostly dried out, and since I don't retain muscle or fat well, you can see my bones pretty much everywhere. I don't take them off around anyone but Mom and Kaken. He shook his head, staring into the distorted reflections swirling in the soup. I'd prefer to not have to if possible. It's just not something I want people to see. Izuku, you can't hide behind your bandages forever. I get where you're coming from. But damn it man, if you don't think people will like you because of how you look, then F them. Sorry auntie. Inko shook her head. You never change, do you Katsuki? I have to agree with him though, honey. If people can't see your worth beyond your appearance, you don't need them in your life. I know. I just don't want to risk it. Plus, if I get joked on it's fine, but if you all got made fun of because you were hanging out with me. Shudo wasn't having any of that. Izuku. Shudo's voice remained calm and even, but there was a slightly shaky undertone that was only stood out because of how he always sounded. He never let on to emotions except when he really needed to. Yeah. What's up, Shudo? Do you always have a sarcophagus in your room? Yeah. I sleep in there sometimes, but I usually sleep in my bed. Is this just a part of your mummy aesthetic, or is it actually comfortable? Oh. Kaken says it hurts his back, but it's insanely comfortable to me. I sleep there when I can't get to sleep for whatever reason. Izuku used some of his bandages to reach into the bathroom and for a few seconds Shudo caught a glimpse of Izuku's hand. The skin there was almost gray, lacking pigment and so thin that you could see the outline of his bones and veins protruding, dry patches of ashy skin in the webbing of his fingers. Shudo turned away so that Izuku wouldn't become uncomfortable, but he understood why Izuku was so worried about going to school without his bandages. With Hitoshi's quirk and appearance, and Shudo's scar, they were made fun of enough as is. And they were the kids of pro-heroes. If Izuku went to school without his bandages, he'd not only obliterate his own reputation in the superficial hate carnival that was junior high, he'd accidentally drag them down with him. Too bad Shudo had a game plan to combat Izuku's fear. He wasn't about to let his friend deal with all that CRP on his own. Shudo, Katsuki. Katsuki, half and half. Katsuki, it is 12 in the goddamn morning. Katsuki, there better be a good but reason for waking me up. Shudo, it's about Izuku. Katsuki, and now I'm awake. Shudo, you know, I'm kinda considering hiding Izuku's bandages. Katsuki, I've considered the idea before. Katsuki, I only raised the question that if he encountered a situation where he needed his quirk he'd be much fed. Shudo, sheet you right. Shudo, well my sperm donor just said that I can't come home still so I'll be over his house tomorrow, and I'm in all his classes. Shudo, I got his back. Katsuki, I'm having a seizure now because I simply can't imagine you actually saying that out loud. Shudo ignored that last message and got to work and started hiding all of Izuku's banda. How many FANG rolls of bandages did Izuku have? Hey, Shudo, have you seen any of my bandages? I can't find any of them and I'm not supposed to wear the same ones for more than 3 days without washing them. Shudo shook his head and began searching for his school jacket in the bag he'd brought. Dang it, now what do I do? A knock at the bedroom door signaled Inko's call to breakfast. Izuku looked over at him for a second, absolute terror in his eyes before he opened his eyes and walked downstairs. Without his bandages. Izuku, where are your bandages? He glanced downwards and Chitter mumbled something. Sorry, one more time sweetie? I can't find any of them. Izuku, it won't be that bad. One of our classmates is a literal lizard. You'll be fine. Todoroki deadpanned. Izuku had reached muttering, nail-biting, near hyperventilating levels of nervousness. The whites of his eyes gave way to the inky black they only became upon reaching absolute stress levels. Bakugo's waiting on us. That got Izuku's attention and he started walking, but he was biting his nails so much that Todoroki had to slap his hand away from his mouth. His eyes met Shudo's and slowly made their way back to the normal emerald green. Sorry. Shudo shrugged. He opened his bag and quickly looked inside. A spare roll of Izuku's bandages, right where he'd put it the night prior in case Izuku got too uncomfortable. He shut his bag and stopped behind Izuku at the Bakugo's door. Coming without the bandages, Deku? Izuku shook his head. Not on purpose. I lost them somewhere. Jesus, Deku, how do you lose 10 FNG rolls of bandages? I swear, if you were any more scatterbrained, your brain would in an actual jar. That's so I'd be an actual mummy. Izuku cracked a small smile. They made it halfway to the train station before something went wrong. While passing through an alleyway they caught a glimpse of hero battle taking place and, as if fate was giving Shudo a massive middle finger, the hero fighting was none other than the number 2 hero himself. They tried their best to duck away from the scene, but they'd unfortunately arrived just as the battle had finished. Endeavor spotted them and began walking in their direction, before the ground began shaking at his feet. A spirit burst from the ground, golden and translucent, with giant wings. Only Izuku seemed to recognize what it was. The being, an Egyptian spirit of the dead, basically a human soul. Bakugo glanced back at Todoroki, in a questioning, almost caring manner. Who knew he cared about anyone but Izuku? Move aside. I must speak with my son. Endeavor dismissed the BA and attempted to sidestep it, but he was pushed back. Ansaraf. Almok Yarfid Wajadak. Endeavor's face contorted in annoyance. He surged forward, presumably to push past the Ba, but a sudden burst of hot air threw him back into the crowd of people watching his fight. The boys hurried off, attempting to get away before Endeavor could give chase. Izuku managed to catch the eye of the Ba one last time. It tossed him something and he miraculously caught it. It spoke once more, but something clicked in Izuku's mind and this time he understood. Hiya, Malik Jayid. Go forth, good king. Alright. Izuku, I heard you mumbling back there, so tell me. What the hell was that thing? Some kind of chicken demon. Izuku shook his head. It was a Ba. Mummy aesthetic aside, I read up on Egyptian mythology a lot for a project. The Egyptians believed there were 5 parts to the soul. The one we saw is the Ba, or personality. There was also the Ren, or name, the Ka, or life, the Ib, or heart, and the Shut, or shadow. Bakugo gave him the and. Izuku sighed. The Ren was your secret name. Everything about you condensed into about 10 words, give or take. Izuku was suddenly overtaken by a small giggling fit. Yours would probably be Lord Explosion Murder, or something. Katsuki grinned. Hell yeah. Sounds badass. Izuku only laughed harder at this, nearly falling out of his chair. Anyway, the Ka was basically your life force. You could use it for powerful spells, but it would usually kill you if you overdid it. Katsuki's grin faded and became slightly serious. Listen, Deku, if you somehow find out you can do any of this Egyptian magic CRP, don't you effing dare die on me, got it? I agree. We don't want to worry about your ba following us around because you overdid it. You and Bakugo are the only friends I've had, so I'd be pretty mad if I lost either of you. Katsuki turned and smiled. Not a smirk, but a genuine, happy smile. Don't worry about me half and half. I'm not dying anytime soon. Likewise, the door clicked and the teacher walked in. Alright, time for class, so settle down. Everyone made their way back to their seats and class began as normal. Except one Izuku Midoriya. He looked around and noticed something. No one was looking at him weird, or acting like he'd done something wrong. It was just normal. Izuku liked that word. Hey guys. Midoriya coming without the bandages. That's super cool. Bakugo grunted a hello, and sat down to eat his curry, which was an unhealthy shade of bright red. Hey Kirishima. Yeah, I kinda lost them. Kirishima shook his head. That is this man. He gave Izuku his trademark shark-tooth grin. I hope you find them soon. I hope so too. Where's Hitoshi? I don't think I've seen you two apart since the first day of school. Kirishima suddenly frowned like he'd only just remembered something. He was with me a minute ago. I wonder where he is. Speak of the devil. Hitoshi walked through the door looking terribly confused. Hey, no time to talk guys, I gotta get home. My dad got me an early birthday gift, and it's evidently super important to him. Kirishima's eyebrow quirked. What do you think he got you? Hitoshi shook his head. I don't know, but whatever it is, they're outside. I just came in to get lunch. God knows Dad can't cook. And with that, he rushed off to the lunch line, and out the door. Hitoshi, holy sheet. Hitoshi, what the F dash? Hitoshi, Shoyuda Aizawa, best dad, 2K19. Katsuki, what the hell? Hitoshi, he got me ACAT. Izuku, where is your house? I'll be there in 3 seconds. Shudo, we're literally in between classes Midoriya. Izuku, I have a 109.5% in math. I think I'll be okay. Shinso, Izuku no. Izuku yes Jake Jake slow Sludge Jake. Katsuki, snatched. Izuku, you can't leave school to go see a cat. Try and stop me. I will freeze you to that desk. Then I'll bring it with me. Todoroki threw his head back and groaned. Hey mom, we're home. Inko came down the stairs in a frenzy. She waved to them and continued speaking with whoever was on the phone. Izuku looked worried and began moving towards her, but Todoroki grabbed his arm and pulled him back. When she finally finished talking, she hung up and turned to the boys. Tears pulled at her eyes, but she smiled wide and happily. After some evidence searching and a case being brought against him, Endeavor is being taken to court for child abuse by your sister. She said that while she can't take care of you if he did get convicted, she'd heard that you were staying with us and said that it might be best if you'd continue. She finally let the tears fall, and Todoroki was gaping in absolute disbelief. Todoroki, how would you like to become a part of our family? He looked down and stood still for a moment, before rushing forward and hugging her. For the first time since his mother had left, Shudo cried. Happy birthday Hitoshi, the other 4 boys shouted. Of course it was nothing in comparison to present Mike, who blew out the candles with his voice alone and caused the table to shudder dangerously, prompting Aizawa to ready his capture weapon in order to save the cake should it fall. It was July 1st, almost time for summer break, and best of all, a certain Hitoshi Aizawa Hizashi's 15th birthday. The kids were given the day off from school by their parents, mostly due to the fact that they were acing their classes, and had no real reason to be there due to the fact that teachers were no longer giving real work. In the end, however, despite the parents not wanting them to believe it so, they probably would have let them have the day off anyway. Thanks guys. I glad you all could make it. Kirishima gave a good-natured smile, shark-tooth grin and all. I wouldn't have missed it even if I had the flu. I'd probably be wearing a mask though. It'd be the worst possible thing to sneeze on someone's birthday cake. He joked. All right Shinso, time for you to make a wish. Yamada Hizashi was loud to say the absolute least. It was to be expected, his quirk was basically made for him to be loud. But surprisingly, even without his quirk, Yamada could probably leave your ears ringing for about 30 seconds without using his quirk at all. Happy birthday, kid. A rare smile graced Aizawa's face, somehow accentuating the tired wrinkles under his eyes. Thanks, Dad. Hisashi turned off the lights and after a quick round of happy birthday, during which Bakugo didn't bother to sing and instead spoke the words, and Shinso blew out the candles. Aizawa Yamada Hitoshi woke up on his first day of his third year of junior high having only gotten about 3 hours of sleep. Well done, you idiot. Jokes aside, Shinso stumbled out of his room with dark circles around his eyes. He greeted his dads in a mumbly, barely understandable tone, and chugged a mug of coffee left on the counter. He stumbled back towards his room, nearly falling along the way, and tried to get ready for the day. He almost brushed his teeth with shaving cream. Bakugo Katsuki woke up an hour early in order to go for a morning run, and encountered 3 villain attacks that caused him to change course and make at least 5 detours. One villain with blade hands, who happened to be restrained by Aizawa on his morning patrol. He waved to Bakugo before slamming the villain's head into the road. Slightly unsettling, but Bakugo never admitted. Number 2 was a villain with a Medusa-like quirk which paralyzed people for some amount of time depending on how long they looked him in the eye. An up-and-coming hero by the name Death Arms took the Enderman strategy and swept the villain's legs out from underneath him before knocking him out with a well-placed kick to the lower jaw. The third and final villain was probably the most interesting. A villain with a shape-shifting quirk that would have had Izuku on a tirade. Another shape-shifting hero by the name of Ryuko turned into a dragon and threw him into a building. She managed to sustain minimal injuries, nothing even close to the level of a broken bone. Katsuki wouldn't be surprised if she became one of the top heroes within the year. Of course he'd be better, but that was just an objective fact. Izuku woke up to discover a new part of his quirk. His mom had made a special breakfast of fried eggs, turkey bacon, and pancakes. She only reserved American breakfast for special occasions, and he'd say his first day as a third year definitely counted. He'd been feeling weird all morning, however, almost as if someone was looking over his shoulder. Good morning, honey. Where's Shudo? Doesn't he usually wakes you up? Izuku smiled and shook his head. He said that he needed to find something. He'll be down in a minute. Shudo did indeed walk down a few minutes later. He gripped something in his hand so tightly that it may have just broken under the pressure. It's the keychain my ex-father gave me on my first day of junior high. I guess now would be the best time to get rid of it. Suddenly, Izuku's eyes slid out of focus. He could faintly hear his mother and brother calling to him, but they sounded far away, as if he were 30 feet away from them. Get rid of. Destroy. Hadi. Suddenly the world slid back into focus, and he jumped from his chair as if he'd been electrocuted. Shudo, can I see that keychain? Shudo hesitantly agreed. Izuku breathed out through his nose, and spoke the words he'd heard. Hadi. The keychain fell to dust in his hands, and Izuku nearly fell over. His mother rushed forward to catch him and steady him back into his chair, where he began wolfing down the food as if he hadn't eaten in a week. His mother didn't question it, but the "we'll talk about it later" face was just as apparent as the worry setting into her face. "I'm fine. I just feel tired." The sentence was punctuated by his stomach growling like a rabid animal. "And hungry." Inko shoveled a few extra pieces of bacon onto his plate, along with an extra pancake. He gave a quick thanks before moving on to continue eating his food. Shudo slid in next to him, spearing a fried egg on a fork. He leveled Izuku a questioning look. Izuku swallowed a mouthful of pancake and looked down at his plate, eyes darkening to pure black scara with dark green irises. "I think my quirk gives me Egyptian magic." "Kaken!" Izuku cried from across the hallway. "Deku, ya idiot, I could have heard you if you had whispered. There's literally no one else here but us 3. "Not true." The 3 boys turned around to see Hitoshi and Ijiro standing there. A tired smile was the perfect foil to the over-the-top, broad grin that Ijiro constantly had. "It's kinda nice knowing that this is my last year of getting called a villain by my classmates." Ijiro looked appalled. "You said that had stopped." Only so that Bakugo would stop blowing up in people's faces about how I'll be a better goddamn hero than any of you lousy extras. Seriously, it gets hard to not laugh when you see a dude almost get blasted in the face by someone claiming he's gonna become the next #1 hero. Bakugo smirked. Hey, being a hero means defending the innocents from villains, right? They're more villainous than you are if they're acting like that just because of something you can't control. They heard a door open somewhere behind them as their homeroom teacher beckoned for them to come in. The first day of 3rd year. This is gonna go to shit real quick. I can't believe you actually sucker punched him. He called Izuku the absolute grossest thing on earth. Did you think I wouldn't? Shinso barely held back from cracking up at this. I just thought you could have held off until after class so that we could have all kicked his butt. Shinso giggled out. Izuku pouted in response. Come on guys, he's my brother. You should have at least let me get in the first shot. Izuku pouted further. Hey, didn't you have something to tell me, Deku? Izuku's dark eyes lit up, having stayed their black colors since breakfast that morning. They didn't appear to be changing back anytime soon. I think my quirk gives me the power to cast spells. Like real Egyptian magic. Bakugo's eyes widened. Hell yeah. That's what I'm talking about. A rare softening of Bakugo's typically sharp eyes warmed Izuku's heart at the genuine compliment. Got anything to show for it? Izuku nodded nervously. Why yeah, but I'll need some extra food and an item you won't care about. Bakugo raised an eyebrow, but obliged. Izuku took a deep breath and held his hand out towards the pen Bakugo had lent him. Hadi! Almost immediately the pen blasted apart in a small burst of sand that then vanished, and Izuku swayed in his seat, almost fainting into his food. Shudo helped steady him as Izuku got right into his food. Holy shit! So you're saying there's a near infinite number of those spells that you can learn? Izuku nodded sluggishly. Yeah, but I need to practice a lot more. Or else I'll keep getting nearly incapacitated every time I cast a spell. He tripped over his own feet as he walked. I guess the next possible spell would be to repair. To repair. To join. To mend. I got it. Bakugo whirled around. How the hell did you do that, Deku? Some weird voice in the back of my mind. I don't think normal people hear voices that tell them how to do magic, Deku. I'm a living mummy born from a mother who can pull small objects towards her and a father who can breathe fire. I think I crossed normal a long but time ago. Izuku continued walking as Bakugo turned and gaped at him as he walked back in the house, Todoroki having stayed after school for therapy. See you later. Kaken. What the f***? Mom, I'm home. Inko waved from in the kitchen. Hi honey. How was your day? Did anything interesting happen? Izuku nodded vigorously. I'll show you, but I kinda want to take a nap. I'll tell you after I wake up. Inko nodded. Alright. I love you honey. Sleep well. Welcome, Izuku Midoriya. We have much to discuss. A glowing golden and silver orb floated in the empty space around him. A swirling vortex of golden sand churned beneath his feet. No, talents. He was in a ba form similar to the one who had held back Endeavor. He attempted to speak, but nothing seemed to come out. He focused on the glowing ball, who slowly began to come into focus. He appeared quite similar to Izuku, but his eyes were different colors. One bright gold, the other moonlight silver. He was much more muscular than Izuku however, and he carried the symbols of the pharaoh, a crook and flail. I am the spirit of Horus. The remains of his essence among the lost pieces of the great Egyptian empire. I have been providing you with the means to become a great hero from the shadows. I shall leave you to your sleep, but, should you need anything, I am always present. Alright, now class, it's unfortunately that time where I have to talk to you about careers. The teacher held up a stack of papers for a brief moment before throwing them into the air. Oh, who am I kidding, you all want to be heroes. The class erupted into screaming and showing off their quirks, excluding Katsuki, Izuku, and Shudo, all of whom simply ignored the commotion around them and began talking to each other. It's pretty funny, the only kid in this class who has a shot at being a hero besides us is that lizard kid. Izuku looked at Katsuki with minimal shock. Kaken, you shouldn't say that. At least give them a chance before writing them off. Remember the hero Sirius? She became a hero, and all she had was good hearing. Katsuki scoffed. Yeah, but hearing has some application. What good is pulling your eyes out of their goddamn sockets? He has a point, Izuku. I don't think having extendo fingers is a quirk applicable for hero work. Izuku sighed and face-palmed. You all should have more faith in people. Just because we were born with power doesn't mean other people are lesser. Alright class, settle down. Izuku Midoriya, demonstrate the law of cosines for the class. Why yes sir. All I'm saying is, if they want kids to be healthy, they should probably have real food and not these mashed potatoes that can do this. Shudo promptly flipped over the container of mashed potatoes before anyone could say no, and they just stayed. Not even the gravy dripped. Katsuki threw his mashed potatoes directly behind him, right into the trash can, and nervously eyed the rest of his lunch before Izuku offered him the bowl of chili his mom had him pack just in case. Remind me to bring my lunch every day from now on. I don't trust the school food anymore. Ijiro nodded. Good choice. Why do you think I always bring my lunch? Even on the best of days it's questionable. Good point dash. Suddenly, the mashed potatoes fell, and kept the exact shape of the container. Remind me to bring my lunch too. Mom's been nagging you to let her pack your lunch too. I regret not listening. The final bell had rung, and the three students were on their way home, when they encountered a slime villain we know all too well, who then promptly got his butt kicked by the three of them in tandem. Well then, a medium-sized disguise that came gift-wrapped, and two more witnesses to be eliminate dash. Said villain was cut off by a large explosion in his face, followed by a large surge of ice trapping him in the tunnel. You know, you think a smart villain would attack first, talk ladder. Nah, they're all pretty theatrical. Most of them are doing it to terrorize, others for the rush of being pursued by heroes. The three boys whirled around, all of them recognizing the booming voice that inspired a large majority of the new generation of heroes. All Might, I am here. I see you all contain the very villain I've been searching for. I hope you all aren't injured. Nah, we're fine. The BSTRD couldn't even get close. Even in the presence of the number one hero, Katsuki's abrasive attitude stayed. I'm glad. Now, I have to figure out some way to remove this ice and capture him without letting him attack any of you. Capture. But I believe the spell you're looking for is Taz. I have an idea. All Might turned around to face Izuku. Yes, young man. What is it? Kaken, I need your water bottle. Katsuki nodded and handed it to him. If this doesn't work, I'll need you to back me up. I got ya. Now let's see what you've got. Todoroki dropped the ice barrier and surged towards Izuku. All Might ready to punch, and Katsuki's palms started sparking. Taz! Izuku yelled. The bottle glowed bright green before creating a vacuum of sand that escaped in the slime villain. He replaced the cap on the bottle before sitting down and handing it to All Might. Very impressive, young man. May I ask your names? I'm Izuku, this is Katsuki and Shudo. Your quirks are quite impressive. You'll all make great heroes. Katsuki wore a broad grin, while Shudo bore the same. Well, I better get this guy to the police station. So long. He crouched down and launched off into the distance, the slime villain secured within his pocket, and held down with his belt, as per Izuku's recommendation. That was awesome, Izu. Izuku groaned from his position on the ground. Thanks. Now help me up. I'm starving. Kaken, what the absolute F dash dot. Katsuki Bakugo is many things, including a hot mess when it comes to food choices. At the time, he was pouring a mixture of hot sauce and syrup onto his pancakes. It was the summer just before their third year of high school, and Inko, Mitsuki, and Maresu had gone on their own vacation to see Midoriya Hisashi in America, and our five protagonists had opted out to stay with Hitoshi and his dads for the 2 weeks their parents were gone. Shoyuta and Hisashi had left early, and, evidently, Bakugo took this as an opportunity to eat as weird as he wanted. That absolutely cannot be healthy. Shinso deadpanned. Bakugo scoffed and began swirling whipped cream on top. F off assholes. It's my breakfast, you don't have to eat any of it. He began swirling caramel on top of it all. Maybe not, but having to look at it is bad enough. Shudo smirked as he said it, while Ijiro choked on his cereal in the background. Shinso gave him a few quick pats on the back. Izuku snickered and began buttering bread before dropping it into the toaster. He's not exactly wrong, man. Ijiro coughed out. F. All of you. Alright, you kids better not get into UA. I don't think I could handle dealing with you for any amount of time longer than 5 minutes. Aizawa said blandly. He said it with a smile, so it was quite likely that he meant nothing by it. The 5 kids had spent the past 5 minutes arguing over who got to be Dry Bowser in Mario Kart. They're definitely getting in Aizawa. Just accept that either you or Ken will have to teach them. Just because it's inevitable doesn't mean I have to accept it. Screw you fuckers, guess who's in first? Kaken, never forget the blue shell exists. Deku, don't you dare. Too late. Aizawa focused on Shinso for a split second and noticed a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. As Izuku passed the finish line in first, and Bakugo began grinding his teeth, he saw his fairly reclusive kid smile. A full, not forced, fully fledged smile. It warmed his heart more than he would ever believe possible, or would ever become comfortable admitting. Alright, what do you kids want for dinner? I can't cook, and the cabinets are mostly empty anyway. Suddenly, a knock at the door drew their attention. Hisashi walked over and opened the door to reveal, All Might. Hello, present Mike, where is your husband? I fear that I don't exactly understand what my course entails. In the living room with Shinso and his friends. Oh dear, shall I come back at another time? Nah, they're all pretty big fans of yours. The kids in question hadn't been listening from the living room as they ordered their pizzas with Aizawa. So imagine their surprise when the number 1 hero walked into the living room and promptly deflated. All Might, did you lose track of your time limit again? I'll take that as a yes. Bakugo stared, Izuku maintained a smile, but his eyes had gone completely dark, irises and all. Todoroki gaped, and Shinso didn't seem surprised. This'll be hard to explain. Alright, here's the gist of it. All Might lifted the side of his shirt and showed the spiraling scar on his torso. I got this in a fight with a really powerful villain about 5 years back. Oh, the fight with Toxic Chainsaw. Izuku exclaimed. Wow, you really know your stuff, Izuku. Nah, this is a different fight. I kept it away from the media. Only a few people know about it. Either way, the injury can't be fixed. Do we have any spells for healing, Horus? Nothing specifically for healing. But maybe Taz could do the trick with enough magic. If we only had a staff. Right, Izuku, grab some kind of stick and say heck what. Hitoshi, it may seem kinda random, but if it works, I might be able to help All Might. Do you have any dowel rods? Maybe in the junk drawer. I'll go and see. Aizu, what are you planning? Katsuki said, utterly baffled. I might be able to help All Might if I have a higher magic reserve. Katsuki blinked. And you're gonna do that with a stick? Hitoshi re-entered the room with a half-empty package of dowel rods. Izuku grabbed one and held it out in front of him. Heck what? The rod glowed and extended into a 4-foot-long staff, headed with a wooden cobra, and covered in glowing hieroglyphs. It vibrated lightly, sending waves of magical energy. Izuku, can you FING stop becoming more and more overpowered? Katsuki growled. Izuku smiled weakly, then turned to face All Might. I sure hope this works. Izuku swallowed and his staff glowed bright green with a blue ink floating in between the cobra's fangs. His resolve strengthened, and he pointed the head of his staff in All Might's direction. A green orb containing the same blue ink floated forward and sank into All Might's side, right where his scar was. He coughed lightly before his eyes widened. He lifted up his shirt to reveal nothing. The spiraling scar from before was gone, no evidence that it had ever been there. Incredible. I feel, he suddenly stood up and reinflated back into All Might. Like I could keep going for 100 days. Izuku smiled and jolted in shock. And I don't feel as tired as I normally do. The staff in his hand shrank back down to its initial form, and he quickly stuffed it in his back pocket. I'm either gaining a tolerance to my own power, or I found a new source of power to draw from. From within his mind, Izuku felt the familiar voice of the spirit of Horus. Possibly a mixture of both. The staff has its reserves, but it's mainly offensive. To be a true magician you need a wand as well. How do I get one? I need to get stronger if I want to be a hero. Perhaps you could carve a wand. It would typically be a boomerang-shaped piece of wood with intricate hieroglyphs burned into it. Sounds pretty complicated. Maybe so, but you have the spirit of a deity on your side. Deku, can you stop talking to whatever spirit is in your head? You've been standing there for like 3 minutes. Izuku jumped and stared at the floor. Oh, sorry. Katsuki smirked. Young Midoriya. Izuku turned to All Might. I'd like to thank you again. As thanks, I'd like to ask you to be my successor. My quirk, One for All, will be yours to inherit should you choose to. Sorry, but I feel there's a better candidate. All Might blinked, as if he wasn't expecting a no. Very well. Who do you think is more worthy? Shinso. The boy in question turned to him in shock. You've always been called a villain for your quirk. Yet, instead of crumbling or succumbing to what people say about you, you've gone out of your way to help people. You're more worthy of it than I am. All Might turned to Shinso. Do you accept the power your friend has proven that you truly deserve? Shinso grit his teeth and clenched his teeth as tears beaded in the corners of his eyes. He looked up to stare All Might in the face. Yes. The resounding laugh filled the room. Fantastic. We'll need you to start training though. The power of One for All could cause some serious damage to your body if you aren't prepared. Aizawa's eyes narrowed. I think I'm going to be overseeing your training. For safety reasons. And a sheet load of intimidation apparently. Izuku suddenly woke up in the same black landscape he had been in when he first met the spirit of Horus. He looked around, and his eyes adjusted to see what the landscape really was. Dark hills and shadowy buildings rose in the distance, far away from the valley where Izuku stood. Unbelievably strong winds whirled around him, but seemed to purposefully avoid getting within a certain distance of Izuku. He turned around to face a tall cliff with a lightly glowing, golden waterfall that acted as a shining beacon in the darkened landscape. And standing there in front of the lake where the waterfall pooled, was the glowing spirit of Horus. Izuku walked up behind him and noticed many major differences in appearance since he'd last seen the spirit. He'd grown in height in the last few months, similar to Izuku, and he now sported a gold, black, and green armor jacket, overlaid with a traditional Egyptian wisek with emeralds socketed in. On his belt was a curved sword with a gem-laden hilt, and an emerald crescent charm on the pommel. Nice sword. Izuku spoke tentatively. The spirit grabbed the handle and held it out to Izuku. It's yours. That's the very reason I called you here, Izuku. You wish to get stronger, yet you refused possibly the strongest power you could have. Why? Izuku smiled and looked down at the grass blowing in the slowed wind. Because Shinso deserved it more. My power is enough. And as much as One for All would have boosted me, Shinso could have used the power more. The spirit smiled and transformed slightly. He gained a few inches of height, rising to almost 6 feet tall, and his golden eye turned green, while his silver eye glowed brighter. You truly have the temperament and honor of a warrior. I believe it's time for you to learn a new spell. How? To strike, or summon your sword. Your sword is mostly designated for combat magic, so I recommend that you practice that. He turned to face the sky and noticed the rising sun just above the hills. The spirit sighed and turned to face Izuku once more. I believe it is time for you to rise, Izuku. Practice your sword. It will be an asset to you. The darkened lands faded away, and Izuku woke up to Hitoshi's empty bedroom. He got up, grabbed a roll of bandages, and went to start the day. Toga Himiko was having a less than good day. Her quirk finally got her kicked out of her so-called parents' house, and she was left to wander the streets. The dark clouds began to swirl as light rain became progressively heavier. Despite all that, she maintained her smile. Even when the police showed up to take her back home. Even when a detective questioned her about her parents' whereabouts when they returned to her home. and even when the pro-hero Ingenium was assigned to keep watch over her. 2 weeks later, Izuku, Shuto, Katsuki, and Ijiro followed Hitoshi to the trash-littered Dagoba Beach. All Might had requested they meet him. Aizawa had went there earlier to look over All Might's preparations, and possibly intervene if necessary. It was a serene enough day, the sun was shining, but there was a light breeze going, and it was cloudy enough for the sun to not be devastating for their eyes. Izuku had recently began feeling a light thrum of power in whichever pocket he'd used as a do-it pocket in which he chose to store his staff. That been a difficult lesson to learn. Izuku mused. His first few attempts had quickly required him to buy a small pack of dowel rods due to the destruction of the original. And the next 5 after that. So, Deku, any new spells? I noticed you haven't been trying anything new since we found out All Might's secret. Izuku jolted out of his thoughts and turned to face his friend. Well, I sort of found out I can reach a pocket dimension to train? It's sort of in the do-it though, so I can't exactly take us there without you all being at risk of dealing with some pretty powerful demons. Ijiro laughed. Stronger than the one we fought last week? During their time spent around Izuku, the 4 became semi-familiar with magic, and Katsuki had even almost managed a Ha-D before promptly passing out. It seemed, however, that they could only use spells at a few auspicious moments, typically early morning and noon. Perhaps because they weren't born magicians like Izuku. Of course, the demon they'd fought last week was no joke. With rooster claws for hands, the demon had great offensive capabilities. However, Izuku managed to quickly pull off a destruction spell from behind while Katsuki and Ijiro fought it from the front. It had been quite the difficult encounter, but thanks to Ijiro's hardening quirk, they'd made it through it relatively unscathed. How does strong enough to cause All Might problems, even in his recovered state, sound? Ijiro paled a little bit, and Shinso, who'd been listening in, flinched slightly. Yeah, pretty much. They only avoid me because of the spirit's presence. Even then, one of them tried to get close before the spirit fried them. You do realize that you can call me Horus, right? Evidently he wants me to call him Horus. Katsuki looked back at him with a look of mild amusement. A distant metal screech sounded in the direction of the very beach they were headed to. The 5 friends looked at each other in mild worry before continuing on their way. When they arrived at Dagoba Beach, after stopping for a couple of minutes to get a bird's nest back into a nearby tree, the first thing they noticed was the 2 adults who were supposed to be training them still setting up. Aizawa was setting up a few things that looked like pole vaulting posts and some freestanding poles in between and alongside them, while All Might had localized a large portion of the trash the beach was infamous for onto the right side. The 2 quickly finished what they were doing upon seeing the 5 friends arrive, and moved to address them. Alright, knowing that you all need different training for the different uses of your quirk, All Might still assumed that cleaning the beach would be adequate training for all of you, and I had to intervene. The beach has been split into 3 portions, a portion for Izuku and Bakugo to train their mobility, the trash section for Kirishima and Shinso to train muscle mass, and the empty section to practice offensive capabilities and spells without endangering any of you. At this, All Might stepped in and began to speak. Aizawa will be training Izuku on how to use his bandages in a similar way to his capture weapon, and Bakugo on speed and mobility. I, however, will be instructing Kirishima on effective ways to use his quirk in a fight, and overseeing Shinshu's training to take on One for All. However, we have recruited someone new in order to train Shudo effectively. Sorry I'm late. The group of people turned towards the stairs down to the beach to see a young man with large burn scars and black hair looking down at them. I got turned around on my way here. Not a problem, young Dabi. The teenager stared. Now that my old man is in jail, that nickname really isn't necessary. Call me Tuya. He glanced at Shudo and smiled, as if it were some joke only he understood. Izuku shot Shudo a look, and noticed that he was almost in shock. He swallowed and lit a small fire in his palm. The newcomer, evidently named Tuya, lit a slightly larger, blue flame. Shudo relaxed and let the flame dissipate. I'm pretty sure the old man told you I died, right? Shudo nodded. Judging by the fact you're right here, I guess he must have been lying. Bakugo growled and looked back and forth between the 2. Just what the hell is going on? Who the hell is he? Shudo held same monotone voice and expressionless face, but there was a glimmer of something unidentifiable in his eyes. The older brother who my father, who deserves to drown, said died, and used as motivation for my training rather than mourning, or giving even the slightest DMN. Endeavor better be glad he's in prison, or else I'd rip him apart. Bakugo growled. You promised to do that on the first day of school. I'm still waiting on results. What's his cell number? Shudo snorted. Honestly, for once I'm with Bakugo on the murder page. Shinso looked at Izuku with mild amusement. What? I found the spell to set his butt on fire. It'd be fantastic. Everyone stared at Izuku. I think I'm gonna go get some water before we start training. Happy birthday, Kaken. The familiar voice sounded from behind Katsuki, and he turned around to see the small friend group he'd amassed with Izuku's help. Though he'd scarcely admit it, he didn't have the most inviting personality. He'd deny that he ever said that to high hell though, so no use ever bringing it up. Thanks, nerd. Kirishima began snickering in the background. Something funny, shitty hair? You think you'd be more mellow since your birthday is, you know. I didn't ask to be born on Weed Day, Ijiro. Ijiro burst out laughing, and Shudo looked completely and totally lost. Katsuki's eyes narrowed. You know, for 20ths? Shudo shook his head. Katsuki sighed. Seriously, I'm gonna beat your father into the goddamn ground. Kaken, we've discussed this. Any and all ground Endeavor has walked on is dead. That sent Shudo into a mostly silent fit of laughter. Hey Katsuki. Shinso rarely spoke up among their group, mostly because of his quirk. What do you want for your birthday? I tried to avoid asking you, but now that it's down to the wire dash. Buy me a large box of white chocolate and you'll be fine. Kaken, that is literally the worst kind of chocolate. Izuku deadpanned. Your favorite chocolate is dark chocolate. You have no say in what's good, Deku. White chocolate is milk pretending to be chocolate. Do not test my patience like this, Katsuki. Now we return to actual storyline. Izuku, sorry for interrupting your slumber, but I must ask you a question. Horus' voice sounded in his mind and drew him deep into the duet. The familiar landscape formed before his eyes, the golden waterfall where he'd spent many nights training his magic, now flowed alongside a small cabin-like shack where he would typically store things he placed in the duet. The golden warrior played a game of solitaire on the table and chairs they'd set up. He placed down his cards before waving at Izuku to join him at the table. Through your eyes I've seen your mother struggling to maintain your home in addition to working her job. I may have a solution to this problem, however. He gathered the cards and stacked them neatly on the table. It might be a good idea to employ a demon servant. If you can capture one, or convince it to serve you, it could be an asset to you. But won't it attack me? Horus chewed the inside of his mouth and shook his head, but not with much confidence. No, but you will either have to keep a tight constraint on the creature or befriend it. Otherwise, it could very easily conspire against you. Horus turned and looked into the golden waters nearby. The entrance exam is drawing nearer, so I feel it might be necessary for you to learn one of your greatest powers. Your combat avatar. The falcon god stood and walked some distance away. He closed his eyes and began to lift off the ground. A golden silhouette surrounded him and expanded outward, forming a giant falcon-headed warrior. Holding a giant replica of Izuku's sword, it slashed the air before deforming, and bringing Horus to the ground with it. It is my hope that you shall never have to use such extreme magic while in combat, but should you need it, tap into my power. The remnants of Egypt stand behind you, Izuku. The warrior waved his hand and the dream realm dissolved. Then Izuku woke up. He sat up in his bed and looked down at his hands. The phantom feeling of the handle of his staff gave him an idea. Heck what? The floorboards in front of his bed glowed and a demon appeared. He was small, barely 3 feet 5 inches, and shivering with a mostly bird-like appearance, but in place of wings were 2 sets of tentacles with large, sharp claws on the ends. Hast thou called me here to kill me? The small demon kneeled, and looked as if it had resigned itself to its supposed fate. So you can imagine the demon's surprise when Izuku kneeled in front of him and waved. Hello, what's your name? The demon's feathers fluffed up and he shook his head. I don't have one. None besides my secret name. Izuku raised his eyebrow, and the demon gulped. I have been named Wings of Slime, Beast of Claws, Monster of Sea and Skies. Izuku felt a certain control handed over to him by the demon, and complete control over the demon in its entirety. He chose not to use it. I'm Izuku Midoriya, I hope that we can be good friends. As for your name, how about I call you Tsukushu? The demon looked stunned. But he stood shakily, slightly tearing the carpet with his claws. He smiled as best he could with a beak, and folded his top tentacles behind him, as the bottom pair continued moving about excitedly. My own name, thank you very much, sir. Just then, Izuku's mother walked in to see her son conversing with a demon. He quickly jumped up and introduced the two, which led to a rather awkward handshake between a 3-foot-tall tropical bird monster with tentacle claws and a 5-foot-tall mother, who was far from used to demons and other magical occurrences. The rest of the day was spent teaching Tsukushu the basics of the household tasks he would be doing when Izuku and his mom weren't home. The demon was more than happy to learn, and as he stumbled through the tasks, he learned rather quickly as well. The bird demon quickly began to get acquainted with his new surroundings, and in almost no time at all got truly comfortable with Izuku and Inko. Then came the stress of the upcoming UA entrance exams. Izuku and Katsuki had high enough grades to get into basically any school based on academic merit alone, but UA wasn't like most schools, and on the day of the exams the students who had trained fiercely for the last 10 months were truly ready. They lined up at the gates to UA and each made a silent pledge that they would all get in. The gods truly do favor these children. Let's flash back to the morning earlier. Or perhaps even further back. In the weeks in between Tsukushu's summoning and the UA entrance exam, Horus was quite busy making deals with gods long past. So, we're in agreement then. The fiery god across from Horus chuckled, which quickly turned into a cough. The deity pounded on his own chest, before taking a small sip of golden water from the cup on the table. Alas, were it not for this disgraced form, I'd be much less willing to be hosted by a child brother. Or is it nephew? I can never seem to remember. We've been through so many hosts it's quite hard to remember which is most recent. The fiery god kicked his feet up on the table. Horus made a slight noise of discontent. Should you accept my deal, we shall be little more than friends in terms of relations. The falcon god looked at the deity before him. Once clad in armor with staff in hand, he now donned a 3-piece, bright red suit with a black tie and black shoes. His hair was slicked back in contrast to the shorter hairstyle typical of warrior. But I suppose we have bigger things to worry about than simply how we shall be related. Indeed we do. Do you feel it too? The stirring of something terrible. Unfortunately, I do. Do you think it's truly him? The falcon god closed his eyes, and the sword at his side momentarily became a crook and flail. The sun disk briefly appeared over his head, before fading away. I truly hope not. Katsuki Bakugo, Izuku Midoriya, Hitoshi Yamada Aizawa, Shudo Midoriya. Please come to the front office. Katsuki clenched his teeth. They were right in the middle of a goddamn test. He grabbed his paper and handed it to the teacher before walking back to his seat, shoving everything he had into his backpack, and slamming the door shut without waiting. Too bad Izuku has unrealistic following abilities. I get that you're pretty stressed, Kaken, but stop being angry for 2 seconds. Like hell you have any idea how I'm feeling. Dim nerd. Izuku leveled him with a deadpan stare. Katsuki could have sworn his eyes turned 2 different colors for a second. I've known you for years longer than any of the others. They might not get it, but I do, Katsuki. What's bothering you? We've got some time before the others show up. Their lockers aren't on this floor. What if I don't get in? The question hung like a statement. Final and true. I could get any of my kills stolen, or maybe not find any robots. What do I do then? Be a hero. Katsuki turned to Izuku with disbelief and annoyance on his face. What? Think about it. Izuku pulled out that hero listing sheet for some beginning of the year assignment. Back when he wasn't in jail, Endeavor had more captures and villain defeats than anybody. But he was still number 2. Slightly because of his attitude, but also because he never made any rescue attempts. For All Might's debut as a major hero, he saved 1,000 people and still had enough energy left to fight the villain who'd trapped them. Izuku shoved the paper back into his backpack and made sure he had his change of clothes. Why settle for being number 2 because you only fought villains? Helped some people out? If I had to guess, UA probably has some kind of point system for that. Izuku zipped up his backpack and walked towards where the other 3 were waiting for them, while Katsuki mulled over what Izuku had said to him. Help people. Katsuki smiled. Not a grimace, not a smirk, just a plain smile. Bakugo arrived a little bit before the others as his mom had insisted on driving him herself, and proceeded to drive like a crazy person. She stopped at the building drop-off, but didn't unlock the door immediately. She turned around the best she could in the seat and faced him with a big smile that looked almost out of place. Katsuki, I love you. Do your best and kick some butt for you, old mom. He blinked once and smiled back. Thanks, Mom. You know DMN well, I will. Love you too. The exchange was clunky and awkward, but genuine. He got out of the car and started walking towards the main building, seeing other participants walking past or grouping up to talk and, lost in his thoughts, he proceeded to immediately trip over a DMN pebble. He suddenly stopped falling and felt much lighter. In fact, he was completely weightless. He waved his legs slightly in midair, the odd feeling completely alien to him. Sorry for using my quirk on you without permission, but it seems like it would be bad luck to fall right before the exam. He turned his head to see a girl with shoulder-length brown hair and large round eyes. She seemed like she didn't have any makeup on, but her cheeks were a light shade of pink. She helped him stand upright before pressing her fingers together, and all of a sudden he felt like he wasn't a human balloon anymore. He grabbed his backpack from where he dropped it. Thanks, he mumbled. No problem. Let's do our best on the exam today. She walked away with her large, slightly worn-down duffel bag shaking on her hip. The more he paid attention, he realized that most of her clothes looked like they had been re-stitched a couple of times. He shook his head to get himself back together to avoid tripping on another pebble with no one to help him back up. He found himself smiling again, secretly hoping that she got in. He barely had time to brace himself when he heard Ijiro shout his name and come barreling into him like a football player, Izuku, Shudo, and Hitoshi trailing behind. Hitoshi lightly berated Ijiro, but the group kept moving right into the briefing hall. Luckily, their seats ended up being right next to each other in the exam briefing room, leaving them with some strange form of calm they associated with simple familiarity. Katsuki mostly didn't pay attention to the briefing, knowing the gist of what they needed to do from talking with Present Mike over the weeks up until the exam, until, you with the green hair and freckles. You need to stop your mumbling, you're disrupting the other applicants. Some tall kid with blue hair and glasses yelled and pointed at Izuku. He visibly deflated and apologized, and suddenly Bakugo was filled with white-hot anger. Who the hell did this a-hole think he is? Something caught Katsuki's eye, a small symbol or emblem on the boy's clothes. Semi-private academy. Of FING course. Who the hell are you to judge him? Some private school preppy who thinks they can step all over someone just because you're rich. Give me a break and mind your own DMN business. Glasses sputtered and looked taken aback, about to respond, most likely with another overly formal berating, before Present Mike intervened with his voice. Alright, that'll be all you two. Anyway, Present Mike's voice, however loud it was, faded into background noise and he could have sworn he heard another voice in the back of his mind. Well done protecting your friend. For someone hosting the spirit of a war god, he's severely lacking in confidence. Katsuki made his way out of the entrance and briefing hall and collected the ticket that showed which testing site he would end up at. Testing Site D. And Izuku and Ijiro were in. Site C sheet. Katsuki Bakugo stood in the back of the group of student clustered in Testing Site D, and was much more nervous than he would have let on with his trademark scowl. Why and how did they decide that a cityscape this large was necessary for any amount of testing? Not to mention that there were even more just like this one. Over the top. I actually don't know any of these people, he said to absolutely nobody in particular. I wonder how many of them might actually be in my class. He trailed off into his thoughts before he was suddenly grabbed by the shoulder. He turned his head to see the same blue-haired kid from before. The other applicants are trying to focus. You are disrupting them with your, "Oh, it's you. You were quite rude earlier in the entrance hall." Blue hair stopped there, as if he were expecting an apology. "And you were pretty rude for interrupting present Mike back there. I don't care what rich school you went to, that gives you no right to be an uptight beach. Or even close to any right to be as rude as you were to my friend. Do me and you a favor. Lighten up. Otherwise, if you end up in my class, don't talk to me." And he stalked off, leaving the blue-haired kid gaping in his wake. Present Mike called for the exam takers to move to begin. The exam had only 3 minutes left, and Katsuki had 5 points. And not for lack of trying, but after a certain point he stopped being able to find any robots. And now, he was facing the very nightmare he was worried about. Wait, what the hell was that sound? UA and their over-the-top sheet. A giant robot the size of the tallest buildings in the training grounds loomed over the various applicants who, like smart people should, ran like hell. Katsuki made to join them until he heard someone calling for help. He whipped his head around to see the girl who had helped him earlier with her leg trapped under a large piece of rubble, and before he even knew what was happening, he was rushing towards her with renewed confidence. And he couldn't FING stop. He blasted off the ground with what he would probably classify as one of his top 5 explosions, if not for the fact that all he could think about was helping whatever her name was. He flew upward and landed right on the robot's shoulder, and ripped open the weak side panel that had been designed on the side of the robot's head. He let off a minor explosion. Nothing strong enough to knock him back, but just enough to destroy the wires. He didn't, however, remember that the robot would begin falling the moment its circuitry was destroyed, and began to fall with it. He fell, the wind rushing past his face as he prepared to use his explosions to slow his fall the best he could. And with a sudden stinging pain on his cheek, he wasn't falling anymore. Release. Bakugo touched down lightly after being slapped into anti-gravity by that girl. He turned around to see the robot collapsing backwards onto the pavement, and finally let out the breath he didn't realize he'd been holding in. He stood up and walked over to the girl, who was throwing up sparkles out on the side of the road. He was pulled back by an old lady in a nurse's outfit. He recognized the hero, of course. It was Recovery Girl. He'd listened to Deku's stupid long rants about heroes often enough to know that. "Stand back, dear," she said in a calm, even tone. Right now she needs to get it all out of her system. She pulled out a small container of gummy candy and offers him a handful. "That ought to give you back some of your energy. You're practically shaking with quirk overuse." In the heat of the moment, his adrenaline was pumping and he hadn't noticed just how severely tired he was until after the moment had passed. He ate the gummies and felt slightly rejuvenated, but he still stumbled a bit walking through the gates to meet up with his friends. "I actually failed. But I think I hit maximum apathy." Bakugo gripped his backpack lightly as he walked the rest of the way from the train station on his own. He declined the invitation from the others to go celebrate over Hitoshi's house, as he had no doubt in his mind that he had failed miserably. He entered the house, and upon calling that he was home and releasing absolutely no response, he noticed a note on the kitchen counter written in his mother's messy cursive. "If you're reading this, Katsuki, call your friends and tell them you'll be there in 20 minutes. I have to work late, and your father is off helping your grandmother pack up her stuff before she moves houses. The fridge is practically empty, and more groceries won't magically appear. P.S. I'm proud of you, brat." Katsuki read the P.S. 2 more times after reading the whole note, and called Izuku. Izuku had his mom drop Tsukishu off at Hitoshi's house a little while after they had gotten there, and Aizawa's calm demeanor broke upon seeing the bird demon. "Izuku, how does this thing even exist?" Aizawa was apparently mesmerized by Tsukishu, who was starting to get slightly nervous at the overload of attention. Izuku merely shrugged and replied, "Ma'am, magic." Aizawa turned to him with an angry look in his eyes before turning back to Tsukishu and patting him on the head, a gesture which Tsukishu reluctantly returned. This drew a light chuckle out of Hisashi, who was silently recording the entire exchange. "Tsukishu, teleport." The demon sent up a plume of sand and vanished, only to reappear behind Izuku. Sorry, Mr. Aizawa, but you were kind of making him uncomfortable. Aizawa spit out a bit of sand. Could have told me instead of spraying me with sand. 3 knocks sounded from the door. It sounded almost like whoever was knocking was mad at the door. Can someone get the door for Katsuki before he kicks it open? A guy dash. The door flew open and slammed against the wall, only mildly damaged. What's up? Aizawa sighed and bowed his head. Hello, Katsuki. Okay, so I'm not saying I failed, but I absolutely failed. I got 5 points. 5. Bakugo threw a pillow at Hisashi, who was nearly passed out from laughter. Sorry, but did you think that was the only part of the test? I can't disclose any information, but you probably shouldn't worry about it. Katsuki rose from his position flat on the floor. He claimed it was his way of accepting death, and stared. If you give me hope and I fail, I'll actually jump off a cliff. Izuku slurped loudly on his soda as a way of drawing Katsuki's attention. What do you want, nerd? Just suggesting that were you to, hypothetically of course, jump off a cliff, my bandages are significantly faster than any human, and I could probably catch you before you hit the ground. Also mentioning that there are no cliffs for the next 15 in a majority of directions from here. Emphasis on majority, damas. Another pillow was thrown, and for minutes afterward, Aizawa would complain about having to fix the couch. Until a pillow was thrown at him. 3 weeks later, the letters arrived, or rather than letters, what was basically the equivalent of a miniature Roomba with a projector on top. Hello, contestant number 12167. All Might's amplified voice sounded from the mini projector, nearly scaring Bakugo off his desk chair. Now, I am here to deliver your test results. You gained a total of 5 villain points, which by themselves would not be enough to pass. He lowered his head and started planning how to get to the nearest cliff, before All Might continued. But luckily, they weren't the only qualifiers. In addition to your near-perfect written exam scores, we have, behold, rescue points. All Might moved to the side to reveal a board detailing the top 50 scores on the Hero Course exam. Hitoshi and Shudo had been recommended by All Might and Aizawa, so they hadn't needed to take the exam. Katsuki was in 4th place. Kirishima took 6th. And right there in 1st place was Izuku. You gained a total of 60 rescue points for aiding Uraraka Ochako in her time of need, landing you in 4th place overall. Suddenly, it washed over Katsuki like a tsunami, the reality he'd thought impossible. Welcome to your hero academia. He'd made it to the starting line. Bakugo, y'all, I got in. Bakugo, also Izuku, you got in first, you sheet. Izuku, I got 10 boys. Hitoshi, I will pay you actual money if you never type that again. Izuku, no need, Shudo threw a pillow at my face for that. Shudo, I got him. Izuku, I threw a pillow this time, next time it will be a knife. Ijiro, eyes? Bakugo, put those back where they came from or I'm throwing you in Izuku's coffin and burying you. Izuku, rude, it's a sarcophagus. Ijiro, also, speaking of that, what is that thing made out of? Izuku, scrap metal, spray paint, an uncle's forge, and a mother's love. Izuku, and some recycled pillows. Shudo, that thing is now sacred. Izuku, I'd actually kill over it. Not even kidding. Hitoshi, yo chill. Izuku jumped down the stairs as soon as he heard his mom enter the house. Shudo followed suit, albeit less gracefully. I'm guessing you two have something you wanted to ask? She asked slightly nervously. They both had an intent look in their eyes, similar to when Izuku had asked for his sarcophagus. That had been a lot of work, and with how swamped she was at work. Can you look over our hero costumes before we send them into hero basic support? That was relatively tame. And easy to do. Sure, Inko had that look she reserved only for things that made her very happy. Just like one of her sons, she was very expressive, and the fact that both of her kids had gotten into UA, she felt tears pool in the corner of her eyes, and she quickly wiped them away so as to not damage the drawings they had put so much effort into. Izuku's was remarkably simple, but looked exactly like something a hero would wear. Baggy briefs and boots with a plated shendit and utility-style belt, and a weesek of false gold and emeralds. She gave him the suggestion of slightly more armor in the torso, and suched over to Shudo's drawing. His was a long coat of fireproof, frost-resistant material, with ventilation. Goggles, red and blue like old 3D glasses, and kanji of the Midoriya name emblazoned on the end of the coat. Shudo, honey, why did you write our family name on your costume? Nothing against it, it's a nice design choice, but why our family name and not your own name? His jaw tightened, as though he'd expected this question, but had wanted to avoid it. People keep seeing me as Endeavor's son. I'm not his son anymore. You two are my real family. I'd rather leave Todoroki behind. I'm a Midoriya now. Inko covered her mouth as the tears she'd held back earlier began to flow freely, and a feeling of happiness, pure and undiluted, washed over the Midoriya family home. She picked up the paper once more and changed the kanji. Shudo Midoriya. Bakugo Katsuki stewed over his hero costume design, completely out of ideas. All he had was the basic idea of knee pads and boots, with permeable gloves for his explosive sweat. If he could, that wouldn't work. Maybe, too heavy. Why was this so goddamn difficult? He'd resisted the option the whole day, but now, it was nearing 7 p.m., and it needed to be submitted tomorrow. Time to call the MSTR of Design and Efficiency in Hero Costumes. Hey Izuku, can you get over here to help me design this hero costume? How in the hell could you be here in 20-second dash? He was cut off by a vortex of sand opening from the mini obelisk Izuku had gotten them all, and the mummy himself falling through it. Deku, what the F dash dot? A slightly sandy, but still grinning Izuku rose from the pile, which steadily vanished as if falling through the floor. Surprise! Why do you think I got you all those? Katsuki face-bombed. I don't know, maybe because it looks cool and goes with the mummy aesthetic rather than using it as a portal to mysteriously go between our houses. Izuku shrugged and walked to Katsuki's desk, and looking at what he had for his costume design so far. First off, if you're gonna go for gloves, I might sooner recommend a bracer alongside them so a large-scale explosion doesn't throw your elbow or wrist out. Second, maybe have something built to store sweat for a large-scale attack. Of course it can't be too bulky. And so Izuku went down a list of options and ideas, with Katsuki writing down the ones he liked. After the withering look Izuku had given him upon suggesting a tank top, he'd opted for a short-sleeve shirt with an orange X pattern. He'd initially suggested flames, but Izuku shot it down on the grounds of, he already looks like Guy Fieri on crack, the flames on the shirt are redundant. He finalized the costume design, and Izuku left through the same sandy portal he'd entered from. The next day, they each submitted their costume forms and not a week had passed before they were all confirmed by the same designer. A pro, Hatsumaya. In the last week in between the UA entrance exam and the first day there, our protagonists prepared in their own specific ways. Izuku went to work on the various spells and enchantments necessary to bind Tsukishu to the house as well as himself, because as much as he would have liked to, and as hard as he had tried to convince the UA staff with Aizawa as his middleman, he'd been completely prohibited from bringing Tsukishu on the grounds of the school. There was definitely a very obvious loophole there, especially considering the demon's teleportation ability, but Izuku had chosen to ignore it in favor of allowing the demon to explore his living space free of Izuku's complete control of his location. It was tiring work, as he'd opted out of Horus' advice in favor of learning the spell himself. The unfortunate part of that was, as Egyptian was quite the dead language outside of hieroglyphs, which were barely understood and certainly not used in the modern age, he had to use the less direct, less accurate English version. Once he'd finally figured it out, he set up the sons of Horus in the 4 cardinal directions, drew the chalk circle and began the spell. Join house, bind demon. In the typical glowing gold, rather than hieroglyphs, modern Arabic floated in the air in front of his palm. The circle glowed the same golden color, before using the boundary stones Izuku had set up at the property lines to map out a confined area for Tsukishu to wander. He wiped the sweat off the exposed part of his face. It was an unfortunate 36 degrees outside, and the heat was really getting to him after being out there for nearly an hour. Wait, an hour? He double-checked his watch to make sure he had gotten it right, and realized he'd been outside concentrating on the spell for almost an hour. Yeah, he needed to get inside. Thank you so much, Amistiar. I promise to be a good servant. I will make sure the entire house is spotless every day. Tsukashu bounced around happily, getting almost a foot off the ground due to his almost non-existent weight. Izuku nervously scratched the back of his head. You don't have to do that much. Just tidy up here and there. Mom and I will still be helping to clean up too. Tsukashu nodded vigorously and returned inside the home, while Izuku lagged behind to gather his supplies. Bakugo and Kirishima ended up going to the movies together. They had initially planned to all go together, but Shudo, Izuku, and Hitoshi found themselves preoccupied with various work and problems they needed to deal with before going to UA, and so Bakugo and Kirishima had to go by themselves. They decided on Godzilla, King of the Monsters, when they got to the theater, but they had not accounted for how packed the theater would have been a month after its initial release. Bakugo wanted to bail out and see the new Lion King, but Kirishima protested for multiple reasons. Hitoshi kept training One for All. It was almost methodical in a way. Despite the dual training plan Aizawa and Toshinori had come up with, One for All still put enough strain on his body that during the entrance exam alone he ended up with 3 stress fractures in his leg and a broken arm from a bit of recoil he wasn't anticipating. Fortunately for him, as both of his adopted parents were teachers at UA, he got access to the training facilities ahead of time, and, under Aizawa's careful watch, he continued training to use 10% of One for All. Right before breaking a leg from a bad landing. Class 1A. A class of future heroes, guaranteed to be the best of the best by a harrowing and difficult entrance exam. A mature and respectable group of young adults training to be future protectors of everyone and anyone in need. Kind and just, with the wit and ingenuity to help save lives. Come on, we all know that isn't true. Best of the best, maybe so. Kind and just, absolutely. Mature and respectable. Not a DMN chance. Despite that, everyone in the class desired to be a hero. Including our 5 protagonists. Yes, as fate would have it, these 5 kids that have known each other for 4 years ended up in the same class again, something that seemed quite statistically unlikely, and this fact put Aizawa in a spotlight he didn't quite enjoy, as those same 5 kids stared him down, very clearly trying not to laugh. Alright. I got you 5 put in the same class. Happy? He finally caved under the pressure and admitted what he'd done, defeat very clear in his voice. I know you'd be insufferable otherwise, and I didn't want any other teacher to have to deal with your particular brand of crazy. I dunno, Aizawa, began Midoriya, trying and failing to hide his grin behind an inquisitive face. Sounds to me like you couldn't tolerate not having us in your class. Call me sensei. Aizawa deadpanned. Bakugo, the little sheet, grinned. That's never gonna happen. Aizawa stood there for a solid 2 seconds, then drained his styrofoam coffee cup before launching it at Bakugo's head. As I was saying, welcome to Class 1A of the Hero course. Put on the gym uniforms in your locker and let's go. We're wasting time. He walked out the door, leaving a gaggle of confused students in his wake. Except for Midoriya and Bakugo, who got up to put their gym uniforms on, Shinso and Kirishima, who were too busy laughing, and Shudo, who was drinking his own coffee. The boys' locker room was a waiting minefield of questions for our protagonists, such as their collective relationship to their teacher. He's the Insomniac's dad, and we've known him for about 4 years. Izuku's quirk. I'm a mummy magician. And why they were so adamant about getting on their teacher's nerves. He's a big but softy. He wouldn't expel us if he wanted to. The rest of the group made idle conversation while a certain blue-haired boy walked up to talk to Izuku. Excuse me, am I correct in saying that you got first in the entrance exam? Izuku looked up and tried his best to remember the kid's name. Yes, I did. Your name is Ida, right? Ida Tenya. Tenya nodded. You managed to get 116 points, third only to All Might and Endeavor. Izuku boldly cut him off right then and there. We don't mention the E-word here. For all intensive purposes, he does not exist. Ida looked taken aback, but continued on. My mistake. But how did you manage it? Did you perhaps see some part of the exam I didn't? Some sort of hidden parameter? Izuku frantically waved his hands in an attempt to placate the boy. No, nothing like that. Well, maybe. I didn't know ahead of time they gave you points for helping people, but I kinda did it anyway. You put forth the effort and time to help others despite knowing it might have cost you a spot at UA? No wonder they awarded points for that. Helping others, regardless of your own needs, is a truly heroic trait. You are far superior to me. Izuku wildly shook his head. No. Not true at all. You just didn't know. It's no fault of yours. Today we're going to be doing a quirk apprehension test. It'll help me test your limits and see where you need to grow. Midoriya, the boy in question, stepped forward. Your farthest softball throw was 61 meters, correct? Yeah. Use your quirk this time. Anything goes as long as you stay within the circle. Midoriya stepped into the circle and wrapped his bandages around the ball. He tossed it to the edge of the circle, keeping the bandages pulled taut around the ball. Then, as if using an old-fashioned sling, he spun his arm in a circle to build momentum before releasing the ball with an audible crack. The ball flew for about 20 seconds before finally landing a solid distance away. Aizawa held up a device with a small display screen that read, 850 meters? Holy Siri! Bakugo exclaimed from the crowd of students. Wow, that was just something new to try out. Did not expect to do that well. A mischievous smile worked its way onto Aizawa's face. Oh, so that wasn't your best? Plus Ultra, remember? Try one more time. Put in all your effort. Izuku shrugged. Your fault if something gets broken. He clutched the ball, and a golden glow started emanating from him and moved outward until he was encased in a large falcon-headed avatar. He was over 3 times his normal size, so the ball looked minuscule in his hand, but that didn't change the fact that when he threw it, the resulting sonic boom cracked some of the nearby windows. He released the combat avatar, tired, and quite hungry. He looked at Aizawa, who was staring intently at the shattered windows. You know, I may have made a mistake in saying all your effort. He then looked down at the device and smiled an unnaturally wide smile. Then again, I must say, the results justify the unfortunate collateral damage. Try to keep that to a minimum in the future. He held up the device for the class to see. 5,036 meters. The class was quiet for all of 3 seconds, before bursting into an uproar. We can't match that. So cool. Midoriya, what the hell? Izuku, how the hell? Deku, why the hell? He simply shrugged and replied. Plus Ultra, I guess. Before promptly falling flat on his back. Anyone have some food? No one did. The rest of the tests were relatively simple, but knowing he was mostly at his magic limit for the time being, he used his bandages in any way he could to make it through the rest of the tests. And in the end they were given their placement. Izuku placed in first, quite obviously, Bakugo placed in third, with Kirishima in 5th, and Shinso and Shudo tied for 7th. It was a good day overall. Welcome to my house, Miss Himiko. Please, make yourself at home. The young girl in front of him looked around the house, slightly confused. It's kinda small. You'd think the #1 hero would have a bigger house than this. He nervously scratched his head. He had not anticipated this. He'd barely prepared at all, in fact. Yeah, well, up until now, it's just been me living here. I'll be looking into moving soon if you are going to be living with me. But for now, this is it. Thanks for taking me in. The girl smiled, her fangs shining. If I had to live with my family anymore, her smile fell, and she gripped the hem of her long shirt tightly. I don't know what I would have done. The following 5 PRs were just the basic classes any old high school would have. Nothing too serious, except for the fact that each and every class was taught by a different pro hero. Present Mike taught English, their second PRD class, and upon seeing the 5 of them walk into his classroom at once and take up the entire front row, he heaved a sigh and faked a smile, muttering, "Damn it, Aizawa," under his breath as the 5 of them stifled their laughter in order to not interrupt the class. After class, however, all of them, sans Shinso, were held back. So, he really did it, huh? And here I thought he was joking. He looked around to make sure Aizawa wasn't anywhere to be seen, before motioning for the 3 of them to move closer. Don't tell him I told you, but Aizawa ended up going to Nedzu when he saw you all weren't in his class. He said it was because he had quote-unquote experience dealing with you all, but I'd beg to differ. Yamada! The telltale dry shout sounded from next door, and Present Mike took the brief interval of time before Aizawa got there to run at top speed down the hall to escape the man's wrath. Aizawa followed behind shortly, walking as though he'd catch up anyways, and knowing his reliably eerie habit of popping up in random places at inhuman speeds, he probably would. He stopped briefly in the classroom doorway and simply barked orders to get their next class, and ignore everything Present Mike had said. Midnight taught world and quirk history, and while it was an interesting enough class on its own, the fact that it was taught by the R-rated heroine herself made it slightly awkward to say the least. Especially her habit of cracking her WHP at anyone who was dozing or distracted. This habit backfired once, when a kid in the back of the class with purple ball for hair jumped in the middle of his drawing and drew a long, dark line right in the middle of a drawing of their teacher. The poor kid immediately began tearing up slightly, and Midnight attempted to console him by saying that it wasn't a bad likeness and she'd be happy to pose for a few drawings, just not during class. This cheered him up slightly, but for the rest of the day he retained a melancholy tone of voice and continued to flip back to the ruined drawing. The rest of the day's classes were uneventful. Even being taught by pro heroes, math could only be a certain level of interesting. Which is not at all, by the way. But then it came. 7th PRD, Hero Basic Training. Taught by All Might and Aizawa. Wait, Aizawa? Indeed, the man himself was still downing a new cup of coffee and standing there with an unequivocally bored expression, while All Might looked particularly nervous in a way that was only distinguishable if you knew him decently well. Today you're going to be doing battle training, Aizawa said, having evidently finished the coffee, but still holding onto the cup. All Might asked me to tag along because he has, and I quote, no dim idea what he's doing. And having watched him fumble for the past 6 PRDs, I can definitely agree with that sentiment. That said, at the very least he asked for help. All Might visibly deflated at the continued affrontation, and no, not in that way. However, he squared his shoulders and began to speak. Thank you very much, Aizawa, although you could stand to pull your metaphorical punches when I have plenty of dirt to spill on you. He coughed lightly before continuing, throwing a small wink in Hitoshi's direction. That said, let us continue with the instruction for the battle trial. Today, you will be doing indoor battles. He pulled out a small pamphlet and began to read. There will be 2 groups for each exercise. A hero team that will be searching for the false explosive located somewhere in the building, and a villain team that will be attempting to evade the heroes, hide the explosive, and defend it until the time runs out or both heroes are captures. The heroes can also opt to capture the villains instead of going for the explosive. Aizawa gave a dry, humorless smile in All Might's direction. One would think after reading that for 6 class PRDS you would be familiar enough with it to not have to look at it. A look at that. Apparently he wasn't done with his coffee, because he took a slow, condescending sip to punctuate those words. One would think living with Yamada would give you some patience. All Might retorted, causing Aizawa to start coughing and sputtering, and causing half the class to double over with laughter. That said, in order to choose the teams we will be, he pulled out a small box with about 20 small slips of paper. Drawing lots. Ida raised his hand from the back of the classroom. All Might Sensei, would it not be more beneficial to choose our own groups, rather than this randomized method, in order to maximize quirk matchups and combat potential? Meanwhile, Izuku shook his head, prompting Aizawa to call on him. Midoriya, do you have a reason why that wouldn't be a good idea? Izuku nodded, and moved forward to stand in between All Might and Aizawa, before wrapping a number of bandages around his neck in the same disheveled fashion as Aizawa's infamous capture weapon and ruffling his not quite long enough hair to be as messy as the hero himself. In a real combat situation, he began, putting on a banausic tone of voice. You won't be able to pick and choose what heroes show up to help you fight. A real hero must be prepared to work with anyone to get the job done. Now, stop wasting time and let's get on with it already. He made it about halfway back to his seat before the now empty coffee cup was launched at the back of his head. Hey, Aizawa. Bakugo spoke up suddenly. Think if we dyed his hair black and had him stand there for a day, the rest of the class would even be able to tell the difference? Aizawa reached into the bottom of his desk, pulled out an empty styrofoam cup, and launched it. Oh, and before we go, All Might pressed a button, which appeared comically small in his gigantic hands, and a set of panels on the wall folded out, to reveal a large number of briefcases, each marked with a number 1 through 21. They say clothes make the man, and that's especially true of heroes. Your costumes will reflect your personality and what you intend to embody as a hero. That said, it's no small feat that each and every one of you managed to impress Aizawa with the practicality of your hero costumes, despite the very stylized nature of them all, meaning you've managed to balance the two aspects. Aizawa chose that moment to cut in after a good 45 seconds of silence. That said, there are a few complaints I had. Midoriya, mind telling me why you wanted to put some decorative bracelets on when your wrists are where your bandages would be most versatile? Mind telling me why your costume has no armor anywhere except for your goggles? And that barely counts. Seriously, sir, I redesigned your costume while I was making mine, and I definitely think my design would be a lot more rational. Izuku tossed his notebook and Aizawa caught it on reflex. He flipped through to his chapter, and his eyes widened. Holy shit, this kid was good at his analysis. Goggles designed with non-refractive, carbon fiber reinforced, one-way glass, bracers designed to shoot his capture weapon instead of it sitting on his shoulders, visible metal for shoulder and upper arm padding, and detailed explanations on how everything else had light armor. It was DMN near perfect. I take it you like the design? Aizawa whipped out his phone, took a picture, and forwarded it to his costume designer. Midoriya, if nothing else, I'm glad you chose to be a hero and not a villain. You could take down every hero quirkless if you really tried with your analytical skills. Izuku shrugged. Alright, the PRD is almost a quarter of the way through, so if we don't get a move on now, we might have to extend the exercise into tomorrow's class. All Might briefly explained. Unless we want to make the battle time shorter, or extend into tomorrow's class time, you all only have around 5 minutes to get dressed and get down to Gym Gamma. Now that got the class going. In a methodical, orderly fashion that seemed critically unnatural for high school kids, the class of 20 made to get the suitcases that contained their costumes, and got the hell out of Dodge. The 4.5-minute mark hit, and the students were ready to go. And at least 5 of them were over their costumes from the get-go. One kid in particular, the same kid with purple ball for hair that Izuku had noted as someone to talk to, whether the others wanted him to or not, seemed to be bemoaning his failed costume. Of all things, why a diaper? Izuku wished he could argue, or say that the costume looked good anyway, but he just couldn't. It really just looked like a diaper. That said, he'd already mapped out several revisions to the kid's costume in his head, with the number 1 objective being for him to get rid of the diaper briefs. I would say I'm astounded, but that's an understatement. You've all done well to establish such well-designed costume. All Might's eyes landed on 2 kids in particular. The recommended student, Momo Yaoyorozu, whose costume was so revealing that it was midnight levels of bad, and Mineta Minoru, also known as Purple Number 2, with his aforementioned diaper briefs. Well, most of you have, anyway. All Might lightly coughed into his hand, before forging on. That said, everyone come up and draw your lots. Team A, Kaminari Denki and Kirishima Ijiro. Team B, Ojiro Mashireo and Sato Rikido. Team C, Ashido Mina and Uraraka Ochako. Team D, Midoriya Izuku and Bakugo Katsuki. Team E, Mineta Minoru and Jiro Kyoka. Team F, Shoji Mizo and Tokoyami Fumikichi. Team G, Shinso Hitoshi and Midoriya Shudo. Team H, Azui Tiu and Ida Tenya. Team I, Aoyama Yuga and Koda Koji. Team J, Siro Hanta and Yayoro Momo. Well then, if the teams are decided, let's draw the teams who will be fighting against each other. Aizawa brought in a bingo machine and rolled it twice, drawing Team D as the heroes and Team G as the villains. Well, what are the goddamn odds of that? Apparently just high enough for it to actually happen, which on its own was cause for Aizawa to fall to the ground, having bypassed laughter and gone straight to crying, and Izuku was right there with him, while the others were just barely maintaining composure at seeing their bland, scarcely. Emotive teacher having a laughter breakdown. All Might finally put an end to the madness by reminding them of their limited time frame, though if the stagger in his voice was anything to work off of, he was just barely containing his laughter as well. Now, let the battle trials begin. The villains were given a 5-minute planning window, and with Hitoshi and Shuto as their adversaries, Bakugo and Midoriya were prepared for a hardcore game of tactics. Despite what might be thought, a good portion of Izuku and Hitoshi's friendship was forged through their analytical skills and discussion of various ways heroes could do their job better, and considering that all 5 of their little group had trained together for 10 months, they each independently thought they had a good idea of how the others would use their quirks. Needless to say, they thought pretty incorrectly. But, that aside, Izuku had a pretty correct idea of how Shuto would start the fight. The moment All Might called the match to start, they stepped inside and saw a rush of ice all around them. If not for Izuku's quick reaction time, the match may have ended right then and there, but he managed to rip his wand out of the pocket dimension he kept basically everything in, and put up a magical barrier to shield himself and Bakugo from the ice wave. He felt himself smile as he called out into the building. You and I both know how that attack works. It sounded like a whole different Izuku. His voice was harsh, more rugged, like an Izuku who'd seen and been on the battlefield a few times and came out on top. In order for it to get to us that quickly, you'd have to be nearby. Show yourself, lidocaine. The listening class was collectively confused, save for Kirishima who seemed all too used to this. He even shook his head, muttering something about level 5. Some members of the class had their attention drawn by him for a second, before they brought their eyes back to the screen. Ah, how lucky I am, my old enemy comes after me once more. Shuto's tone was light and airy, but laced with a false malice. He trailed down the stairs, almost carefree in a way, his long coat frosted over at the edges, though the waves of heat coming off him were melting the shards of ice left behind by the shattered mini-glacier that he'd sent in their direction. And he brought a new friend with him. Tell me who are you? It'll be nice to know who I have to crush. Bakugo let out a short, harsh laugh. You crush me? His cocky attitude had gone up a tick in intensity. Hate to tell you, but it might end up the other way around. With my powerful explosions that can level a building, I am the hero known as Ground Zero. Ground Zero? I'm quite surprised, dear Pharaoh. It seems you've made a friend. His expressionless face twisted into a truly terrifying grin, using the fire on his clothes and the ice on the walls to reflect ghostly purple light onto his face, deepening the shadows on his face to all might levels, so that the icy blue of his left eye shined brighter in comparison. But he can't do anything to help you here. The once proud pharaoh, Horus, shall fall today. He punctuated his sentence with an outward burst of ice, sent straight for Izuku's face, stopped by a medium-strength explosion, courtesy of Bakugo. When the dust and frost particles had cleared, Shuto was nowhere to be found, so they ventured on. Meanwhile, in the viewing pit, the class was going completely bonkers and driving Aizawa up the wall. Will you all please quiet down? That shut most off the class up, but a few continued to talk. They sound like they're playing a game, Karo. So you watched the two groups communicate on the split screens, communicating back and forth between themselves, with exaggerated dialogue and motions, like characters in a video game. Or kids playing in a parking lot. Well yeah, that's basically what they see this as. A training game. Ijiro commented from the back of the group. He was the only one who had sat back down in the stands. When you're friends with people like them, you don't get to be complacent. It's the only reason we all placed so high in the entrance exam. These guys are extremely manly. Katsuki and Shuto are insanely powerful, and Hitoshi and Izuku both have dual quirks with wide variation in their abilities, so they can basically do whatever. Honestly, I'm probably the lamest out of the 5 of us. He reclined a bit, laying his head on the spot behind him. We've been doing strategy games and training scenarios in an old warehouse by Katsuki's place since our first year of middle school. This is basically par for the course, just with quirks included this time. The class's collective attention was drawn back to the screen when they heard another interaction. It seems that you've discovered our little corner of the building. Too bad. Shuto mused. though he sounded vaguely amused. As if this was some sort of entertainment. I guess that means now, with purple electricity crackling over every inch of his body, his skin glowing like someone had strung up his epidermis with Christmas lights, and his normally tired eyes shining in the dim light of the room, Shinso Hitoshi stepped out from behind the papier-mâché bomb, absently twirling a baton around in his hand. Suddenly, his grip tightened on the RBB handle, and his hold on the baton became more intentional. The surface lit up, crackling to life. Electrified. My partner will have joined in on our fight. The puppeteer. Powerful, but the part of his quirk that can instantly incapacitate you is useless if you know how to activate it. Though he sounded confident, there was a tense undertone, like when you start hearing boss music in a video game. He couldn't slip up here. One word and he was out of the battle. Hitoshi smiled, friendly though it seemed. Just like with Shudo, there was some sort of sinister intent behind it. Tuya really had taught them well when it came to projecting intentions and emotions, but something else about Hitoshi's carefree stance had Izuku worried. It's like he was hiding something. And just like that, Izuku's body reacted before he did, driving him to the side to avoid the kick that Hitoshi had launched, and putting him just far enough away to observe the rush of air that the kick had generated. Surprised? This is only 5% of what I can do. Course if I go any higher I might hurt someone. Hitoshi turned towards him, the same smile from before laced carefully with excitement and raw adrenaline. That said, my upper limit without hurting myself is 10% thanks to my dad's training. I wonder if you can last long enough to fight me at that level. He took a step forward, and Izuku took a step back. He took a half-second to look behind him. Bakugo was preoccupied keeping up with Shudo's ice and fire onslaught. Not good. He could use the help against Hitoshi's speed. He was fast, but not as fast as he needed to be. Maybe if he could tap into Horus's power. He barely had a second to even consider it before Hitoshi was on him again. This time he used his wand for a defensive spell instead of dodging. It worked, but the impact felt like he'd been hit by a truck. Needless to say, he was sent sprawling. And so it continued like that. He dodged Hitoshi's attacks as best he could, missing by only a few centimeters a number of times, before one punch hit its mark. It hurt. Badly. He used a small burst of outward magic to send Hitoshi back before he coughed harshly. He saw a bit of concern flash on his friend's face before he reassumed the emotionless mask he'd had before. Okay, he couldn't afford to get hit like that again. It's now or never. He closed his eyes and stood up, letting the familiar feeling of magic wash over him, but keeping it bubbling beneath the surface. Any outside viewer would have seen his scara turn black as he was bathed in a light gold glow. He jumped at Hitoshi with a little too much power, however, and jumped straight into a wall. As he sat there on the floor, head throbbing, the urge to laugh at his simple mistake overtook his longing to stay in character. And so he laughed. A lot. He could feel tears threatening to spill, and yet, he just kept laughing. Eventually Hitoshi started laughing too. And it steadily spread throughout the whole class. Even Aizawa was barely holding back from chuckling at the humorous exchange. Hitoshi helped him up once he finally calmed down, and just like that, they weren't hero and villain, just friends in a training exercise. He made his way over to Bakugo, and assumed a fighting position. Shudo and Hitoshi did the same thing, and a marginally simpler solution occurred to Izuku. That pile over there looked a lot like an obelisk. And there was another one behind them. Maybe you could... He jumped backwards while everyone else rushed forward. He opened a quick portal and appeared at the other one, just as he'd planned. He reached forward and grabbed the bomb. Hero team wins. Alright, now can anyone tell me who the MVP of that match was? Hitoshi grimaced. He definitely missed the mark in that regard. He barely even got to fight. That smart girl, Yaoyorozu raised her hand. All Might called on her. Izuku Midoriya. Without a doubt. He protected himself and his partner from an attack that could have incapacitated them both, used his quirk to search for them in the building, and fought against Hitoshi's dangerous close-range quirk, while he was much more suited to fight Shudo. He even managed to unleash a burst of raw power to get to his enemy, though in the end, well, let's just say it didn't work out. He also managed to capture the weapon in the end. All Might nodded and continued to speak. Very good, however there is something to be said for each of them in the end. Bakugo Katsuki's usage of high-concentration attacks to blast through Shudo's ice was a highly viable strategy, though it left him open to fire attacks. Hitoshi did a good job of backing Midoriya into a corner, but his form was sloppy and some of his attacks got desperate in the end. Midoriya did a lot of things well, but he seemed to be thinking too hard. Shudo acted as bait to lead them into Hitoshi, but neglected to consider leaving the bomb on a separate floor. But all things considered, both teams did well. All Might went to draw the next lots, and Hitoshi went to apologize to Izuku, who promptly cut him off. If you even think about apologizing, I will stomp you to death with my hooves. Hitoshi stared at him for about 3 seconds and then responded with, "You really are a beach with teeth." Izuku raised an eyebrow. As opposed to a beach with no teeth? Ah, a calm day in May to combat all the craziness that the school life presented. It's an appealing day outside, birds are singing, flowers are blooming. On days like this, kids like you are enjoying a calm weekend with your mom, demon servant, brother, and your best friend. Uno. Izuku said calmly. He took a moment to look up at the rest of the group's expressions. Katsuki looked like he was about to snap, Shudo and Inko looked plain old exasperated, and Tsukishu was silently mourning the fact that he still didn't understand the rules that well. What would this be, Izuku's 5th win in a row? Not that he was counting, of course. Bakugo went to draw and smiled. He played his card. What to draw for? Take that, Deku. Oh no. He looked so happy, Izuku almost felt guilty about what he'd saved as a just-in-case measure. Almost. He played a second draw for. Bakugo's smile wavered and fell, as his arms landed slack at his sides. Shudo threw his cards in the air, and laid on his back. Izuku, you cannot end a round on a draw for. That's almost as bad as earthquaking a man to death. Izuku looked terribly taken aback by this statement, stuttering and sputtering for a moment before responding. Shudo, the amount of disrespect in that sentence was horrible. Nothing besides literal murder is worse than earthquaking a man to death. It's beyond disrespectful. It's mortifying. It's absolutely life-destroying. The complete sincerity in Izuku's voice left Bakugo reeling. Okay, I admit it's bad, but there are worse things. Besides, on that principle, dead riser and dead weight are in the same boat because it's guaranteed damage. Izuku nodded. True, but consider, its effects are not only on a single person, but also preventable if the person gets moved beforehand in some way. Plus, the issue with earthquake also lies with the fact that it's an instant hit. Katsuki scowled. My problem lies with the fact that you're correct, meaning there's nothing I can argue against your point. Tsukishu had apparently gone to the kitchen at some point to get something to drink, and had decided to grab everyone else something too. How polite of him. However, there's only so much you can carry with tentacle wings. As he attempted to walk back, he slipped on the hardwood flooring, again, bird talons, and the various cans of soda went down with him. As he fell, he was embraced by a faint green glow, along with the cans, before any of them would have hit the ground, something that would have caused quite the mess. I really need to find you some kind of grip sandals, Tsuku. This is the 3rd time this week. The bird demon violently shook his head. These nice vests were enough money spent on me, Inko. I'll be fine, I just need more practice. Or to not run in the house. Inko shook her head. Gosh, the 4 of you are so similar. You never ask for help, even when you need it. It's astonishing, completely different backgrounds, and completely different personalities otherwise, and yet you all have that one trait in common. She checked that wall clock and stood up. It's almost 6. I had better get started on dinner. Katsuki, are you staying over, or are you headed home? He stretched and stood up. Thanks for the offer, but I ought to get home. The old hag'll get worried if I don't get home before sunset. He walked to the door, before pausing to grab at least 20 of the Tootsie Rolls from the bowl on the counter. See ya, Annie. Later, Deku. He walked out the door, leaving 3 very confused Midoriyas behind. And one Tsukusu, who had started to boil water for soba. 1 year, 2 months, and 12 days since he was arrested for child abuse, domestic abuse, embezzlement, attempted murder, and SXL assault of a minor. 1 year and 28 days since he was convicted of all 4 charges, with all 5 of his kids giving testimony against him, including the one he thought he'd dealt with. The burning itch under his skin grew hotter still as the raging fire in his system was suppressed even further by the infuriating cuffs around his arms and legs. Oh, how they taunted him, leaving him with the pain that came from trying to call forth his power and never yielding the results he desired. Every time he thought of them it grew stronger. That burning longing to set fire to this place and then to the cozy lives they live. Those insolent brats, and after everything he did for them. So what if he used them from time to time? He paid them back in full with the lavish lives they led. Having anything they wanted or cried for, he gave it to them. All of it. Every last worthless thing. Once he got out of here, he'd destroy them, ruin them. No, that's not right. He'd break them first. Crush what little security they had, then snatch them up and teach them what they'd forgotten. That they were his. His to use, his to break, his and his alone. Greetings. He turned his head sharply to the right, to meet the echoey voice, not unlike someone speaking through a pipe a few miles long. I am Kurogiri. I can get you out of here, but only if you agree to join our cause. He grinned like a maniac, malice and hatred swirling in his eyes. I'll join you so long as I get what I want in return. The glowing yellow amongst the swirling purple grew brighter. Excellent. The portal grew larger and moved forward, depositing him on the floor of a bar. A man with disheveled blue hair and very dry skin looked up from his crossword, but didn't turn his head at all. That was fast. I suppose this means you're going to be working with us. In that case. He stood up and turned to face him. Right in the middle of his face was a severed hand. I am Tomura Shigaraki. Welcome to the League of Villains. Making their way into the school building, our heroes were met with heavy resistance in the form of the worst scavengers in the world. News reporters. The media was wild in front of the gates, having learned that All Might would be teaching there and fishing for the tiniest scraps of information from the students about him as a teacher. Not even our protagonists were safe, until Izuku put up a parting shield to forge a path to the gates. Aizawa was waiting for them there, trying to keep them away from the students. You're not supposed to use your quirks out of class, but for this alone I'll allow it. He grit his teeth as he shoved his way through some reporters that got a bit too close. The media are nothing but a bunch of vultures. We ought to have a class just on dealing with them. He got them through the disaster area and told them to head on to class. They kept walking, even upon hearing the metal gates of the UA barrier crash down. No one noticed the scrawny, blue-haired man in the background. The class was running in typical high school fashion before Aizawa arrived, which is to say, absolute chaos. While the rest of the class seemed to be a complete travesty, our 5 heroes were concentrated around Izuku's desk, playing a quick game of Uno, since Izuku had mistakenly threw the cards in his backpack the other day. The majority of the class returned to their seats when the bell rang, and the rest definitely did when Aizawa walked in, however they seemed inclined to do no such thing. One would think UA students that have known me for so long would know not to push my buttons like this. What are you all even doing anyway? Aizawa questioned, as it seems Bakugo's scream of frustration had drawn his attention away from whatever it is he was talking about. Trying to finally beat shitty Deku at a game of Uno. He's a god at this game. He doesn't even cheat, believe me, we've checked. He grumbled as Izuku sarcastically said, dos, rather than Uno. I don't see how that's more important than my teaching. Izuku looked up at him, and let his eyes fade to pure black. I've won 194 games of Uno over the 14 years of my mortal existence. The hell's that supposed to mean? Apparently, Izuku wasn't expecting this response as he suddenly broke into a fit of hysterical laughter. That, however, didn't stop him from winning for the 195th time when his next turn rolled around. In his wake, by which I mean the simple action of packing up the cards so they could actually pay attention, he left a completely disconnected Bakugo, a resigned Shudo, a completely over-it Hitoshi, and a raving Kirishima. Are you 5 done? Because I've got something important to talk about. The whole class looked on in anticipation. You all have to pick a class president. That's so normal. Immediately, most of the class began trying their hand at gathering supporters. Of course, aside from our first row and one such Tenya Ida in the back. We should hold a democratic election in order to find out who is best suited for the class president. He suddenly shouted, surprising a number of students, and mildly confusing one frog girl. But Ida, said Azui, won't everyone just vote for themselves? He nodded. Exactly, so whoever gets more than one vote will be the most viable leader. That got most of the class in agreement. He turned towards the front of the classroom, presumably to ask if Aizawa was okay with that development, only to be cut off by a simple hand wave. I don't care about how you do it, just get it done. In the undeniable 30 minutes it'll take to get this done, I'm going to sleep. He punctuated that statement by pulling out a yellow sleeping bag and retreating into the closet. He does realize Izuku sleeps in a sarcophagus, right? Aizawa then left the closet, sent Shudo a glare, and walked out into the hallway. Izuku also leveled Shudo a look that screamed, I'm extremely unamused. You know people will start making conspiracy theories if you keep this up, right? I'm not trying to be Hitoshi's brother and yours. Ida cleared his throat to recall attention. Either way, let's begin the voting process. I don't think it'd be the most efficient use of our time to do some sort of introduction, so we'll simply vote based on the impressions we've gotten of our classmates and our performance in the battle trials. Whoever receives the most votes will be class president, and whoever receives the second most votes will be vice president. Yeah, we get it, glasses. If you keep yapping we'll run out of time, so let's get a move on. Bakugo interrupted Ida's miniature spiel in his usual manner, loud and rude but only if you don't know him. You. He pointed to Yaoyorozu who jumped after suddenly being called into attention. Make 20 tiny slips of paper and a small box. When she gets done grab a piece of paper and write who you think is best suited for class president. And don't vote for yourselves. It's just flat out stupid. 3 minutes later and I got 9 votes? Izuku's shout of confusion lined up perfectly with Bakugo's joyful exclamation at having gotten 7 votes. Aizawa walked back in. All right then, it's settled. Midoriya is class president, Bakugo is vice president. Now get to lunch. The bell rings in 3 seconds. As per usual, Aizawa was right on time. The bell rang a few seconds later, and the class rushed to gather their things and get to lunch. And time for the author to break the fourth wall and say I'm tired of typing our 5 protagonists, and please give me some other way to address them. Either way, they sat in their usual lunch configuration waiting for whatever classmate wanted to join them today and make the number at the table an even 6. Today it was the runt of their class, Mineta Minor. He sat down with his lunch, nothing but a box of rice, some fish and way too much fruit. Produce department levels. At least 2 of 5 different types of apples, 8 bananas, 3 oranges, a thing of blueberries, and some grapes. All 5 other people present at the table stared at him until he explained himself. My quirk, he explained, are these sticky ball on my head. They get stickier the more sweets I eat. My dad's a dentist, so he doesn't like me eating of sugar, so I just eat it. Lot of fruit as a substitute. They nodded and went back to their lunch, only to be interrupted by an interjection by Mineta. So Midoriya, you're pretty good at costume design, right? Midoriya perked up instantly and pulled out the most recent of his notebooks, the one specifically dedicated to his classmates. Thank God. I was wondering when you were gonna ask. He flipped to Mineta's page and handed the smaller kid the notebook. There's also a few notes about ways to use your quirk that you may not have thought of. Take a picture and send it to your costume designer. Mineta fumbled to find his phone for a second before taking the picture and handing back the notebook. Suddenly an alarm sounded, and the intercom blared. Security level 3 has been breached. Please evacuate the school in a calm and orderly fashion. Everyone went ballistic. Security level 3 means there's unauthorized people on the grounds. We should get out of here. Hitoshi yelled to the group. Izuku shook his head. We can't get out. The hallway's too full for us to get through. Izuku strained to look over the crowd of people to get a look outside. When he saw what was causing the security breach, he attempted to shout over the crowd of people, which failed. Horus, I need some help getting herd over the crowd. You don't need to be heard, you just need to grab their attention first. Try getting on top of the exit sign. Smart. Thank you. He sent some of his bandages up into the rafters and swung forward onto the exit sign, gathering the attention of most of the group. Everyone, it's just the media. Get a hold of yourselves, we're your students, right? We need to keep it together. The crowd quickly calmed down and began moving in a mostly calm fashion. Well, as calm as you can get for a superpowered high school anyway. Good job on calming down the crowds, Midoriya. I knew I chose correctly when I voted for you. You voted for me? But I voted for you, Ida. Well then, I guess we've made a good enough impression on each other insofar. I look forward to seeing how you do as class president, Midoriya. How was your reconnaissance mission, Tamura? It was a total bust. All I got was the date of the USJ trip. No, wait, this says All Might will be there. All Might, you say? When pre-tell is this trip? Next week, on Wednesday. It'll finally be time for the League of Villains to make our appearance. Now listen, I'm not saying I'm rereading the story and hating a lot of things about it, but I have other stories I want to work on. Particularly, I want to work on Fool's Gold more. It's a better, more sound, less op baseline. However, I also am not permanently abandoning this story. There is a chance I'm going to rewrite this story at some point, however I wouldn't hold my breath. This story is my first love. It's my greatest passion project, and I'll always have a certain tenderness in my heart for the story, but it's not likely I'll come back to it for that reason. I'd rather not beat a dead horse. And where this story is, it's in such a precarious position that if I don't leave it where it is, it'll get worse and worse. If you really want to see what happens when I have more practice, a better idea baseline rather than rolling with the punches, and a better way of developing individual characters, read Fool's Gold. Au revoir, les enfants. A plus tard.